Hey, what's going on YouTube? Aura Storm here with another deck profile today. This is going to be the start of Clash Rebellions week, with Clash Rebellions getting its full release on Friday this week. I thought I'd give you guys a preview of the basically 3 complete new archetypes that we're getting in the set. I'm also including Red Eyes because let's face it, Red Eyes has been being completely revamped. It's basically a brand new archetype at this point. So I'm going to discuss, first deck I'm going to do deck profile on is my Aromage deck. Now there are 3 variants on Aromages. I'm going to go into them a bit. The first one is the stun variant. The stun variant usually runs lose 1 turn, and some variants I've seen people talk about this Cactus Bouncer card as well. But I do think that the stun, sadly, much like Yosenju's, I think the stun variant will be the most popular Aromage variant. And one of my Twitch mods, actually, I've seen a little bit of his build. It's pretty consistent, if nothing else. But, you know, if you've been watching my channel for a while, you know not the biggest fan of stun decks in general. So that's why I'm not playing the stun variant. There's also another variant that runs Trap Tricks. Runs this card called Naturia's Sacred Tree. Basically, this variant runs cards like Sacred Tree, where you trade in your Trap Tricks monsters for your it basically trades in your Trap Tricks for your Aromages, and your plant type monsters basically trades them back and forth. It also runs a lot of builds I've seen run Crane, and because Crane opens up the ability to make I think it's called Melee of Trees is the card. I have one in my binder somewhere, which I don't know what her name is. This one, yeah. Card's named Melee of Trees. That's another variant you can play, but my personal take is actually the Synchro variant, because as you know, Aura likes making synchros, and if he can make them work on a consistent basis in a deck, he plays them. So anyway, with that out of the way, let's get to deck profiles. First off, we've got 2 copies of Bergamot. Bergamot is a high-level monster, so because you're running 3 Lone Fires, you only need 2. You don't always want to see it. You know, it's kind of one of those things with high-level monsters, but she's incredibly good. The fact that she inflicts piercing damage, she gains 1,000 attack, she's 2,400, really good solid card as a 2-of, but because, you know, you play 3 Lone Fires, you play 2 copies of this big one. So 3 copies of Kinagog, I don't know how to say the name, but basically this one is your bounces, spells, and traps. Basically, it bounces spells and traps when you gain life points. They all have an effect when you gain life points. You can tweak a lot of these ratios of the smaller ones, I think, but this is my take on the ratios. 3 copies of Jasmine. I think I've tested between 2 and 3 Jasmine. Jasmine is draw power, which is Solemn Wishes, and is incredibly good because you're gaining more life points every time you draw. I feel like you can get away with running her at 2, but you kind of want to run her at 3. You may not use all 3 copies, but you want to see them as early as possible. 2 copies of Rosemary. You could probably run 3 Rosemary because she is your biggest. She is your big beater basically, and Jasmine lets you draw cards when you gain life points, and Rosemary changes battle positions, which is pretty key because if you have Jasmine actually allows you to get an additional normal summon when you gain life. So when you gain life with Rosemary out, you can switch Jasmine to defense mode, and she'll be at 2,400 after Garden is activated. 2 copies of Ghost Ogre and Snow Rabbit. This is your main primary tuner e-tele target. Card is not, as I've said, the card is not worth the price because we don't have a lot of pendulums, you know, really good pendulum decks out right now. But as a tuner for this deck, she's really important because she opens up Ancient Sacred Wyvern plays, which if she wasn't a light attribute, I would play something else, but because she's a light attribute, I play her. 3 copies of Yugioh because it allows you to go into the few rank 4s you do play, but the other good thing about Yugioh is you play a lot of really smaller monsters, so it can bump your monsters, and it gains you life, which is key. I feel like it's a 3-of because it can also keep you protected as well during the battle phase. 2 copies of Krebons. This is another e-tele target because one of the things I was noticing when I was testing it with just 3 Ghost Ogres was that I was noticing that I couldn't make level 8 synchro monsters very consistently, whereas with Krebons, you can make level 8s with Bergamot and Krebons respectively. And because Krebons is dark type tuner, you can make Beazle. Just if you can make Beazle, you want to run it, right? So that's why I play Krebons. It also can protect itself by paying 800 life points from attacks. And in a deck where you can have tons of life points, it's not really a problem. And of course, the obligatory, you're playing a mostly plant deck, 3 copies of Lone Fire Blossom. Doesn't really need an explanation. You play Lone Fire and Aromages, it just makes sense. You know, the card is just great in this deck. I don't think it really needs a ton of explanation. And then for this is all the monsters. There's 20 monsters, it's 20 monsters, 10 spells, and 10 traps. So it's like pretty, standard for deck building. 3 copies of Aroma Garden. Aroma Garden is a pretty key card in the deck. That's why I run Terraforming, because it is your primary way of gaining life points, and on top of that, you gain life when your arrow monsters die, and all your monsters gain 500 attack and defense until the end of the turn. So all your monsters get bigger with this out as well, which is really key. You want to see this card as early as possible. That's why I run Terraforming. 2 copies of Emergency Teleport, because you're playing 4 targets, so 2 E-Teles. 2 copies of MST, this is an Aura Storm standard, you always run 2 space. 1 copy of Regeki, because it's a staple. And 2 Terraforming, like I said, because you want to make sure you open with, you want to make sure you get your Aroma Garden as early as possible. It's the same reason you run it in UAs. Now for the trap cards, 2 copies of Draining Shield. This is basically like a reverse Magic Cylinder. It gains you life, it negates an attack, and it triggers all your Aromages effects. If you want to maybe not run this and run 3 copies of, Humid Winds or some other card, but I think Draining Shield is a really good card in this deck. 2 copies of Fiendish Chain, because it's a slower deck, we don't want effects going through. I really like it, you can probably get away with running it at 3. 2 copies of Powerful Rebirth. This card is really good in Aromages, because first off, unlike Call of the Haunted, it can special summon the monster in defense mode, and it also doesn't change the typing like Oasis of Dragon Souls does. And it does increase them by a level, which doesn't become really key all the time, but it only really comes in key, at least to me, when I'm trying to make a synchro play. But the extra 100 defense will make Jasmine 22,000 defense so it's not really will keep your opponent on there from beating you in with bigger monsters. 2 copies of Humid Winds. This is their trap card. They're basically, you pay 1,000 life, search an aroma monster. It's your searcher, so you can. There's some builds I run 3, but I run 2 in this one. It also can gain your life if you have less life than your opponent, so that's also pretty key. And then 2 copies of Solemn Wishes. I tested a lot of other life point gain cards like Spell Absorption. I feel like this card is the most consistent way to gain life, because each time you draw a card, you get to gain life. And especially in combination with Jasmine, that is really nice, because you'll gain life, you'll draw a card, and it's just a really nice combo. Because every time you gain life, you'll get to draw a card. You'll draw an extra card. It's really, really nice little nifty combo using them together. Now we're getting into the extra deck. 2 copies, 1 copy of Ancient Fairy Dragon. Ancient Fairy Dragon is actually not bad in this deck, because it gains you life, destroys your garden, and allows you to search another, which is really nice. I feel like it's a pretty decent card in the deck. It also can special summon a level 4 lower monster from your hand and open up some other combos. Most of the time I rarely use that effect, because you cannot conduct your battle phase. 1 copy of Ancient Pixie Dragon. Now this is a card it came out I think in Premium Gold 1. You've probably seen it in my Babel Dark World deck profile, but basically if you don't know what it does, when it's on the field, if you've resolved a field spell, you get to draw an extra card, which is a +1 basically, and then the other effect is if you have a field spell, you can pop 1 face-up attack position monster on the field. Really nice card with you're always going to have Aroma Garden up most of the time, so it just made sense to me. 1 copy of Ancient Sacred Wyvern, because you and your opponent, you're going to be gaining life points in this deck. So this card can get to insane levels of attack, like just crazy high levels depending on life difference, and it's basically a game-ending card. So I feel like in Aromages, it kind of just made sense to run Ghost Ogre, because you can make this. 1 copy of Aromages. Aromages is, game against a lot of decks. It's really good against Shaddolls, really good against Yang Zings, preventing. It's decent against Burning Abyss, and the cool thing about having this card with Aroma Garden out is it'll go up to 2,800, which means it'll get over Dante, which is pretty key in that regard. Then 1 copy of Beazle, because you can make it with Krebons. Kind of makes sense. 1 copy of Black Rose Dragon, clearing the board when you're behind. And it's really nice. And it also, because you're playing a plant deck, you can actually use the second effect of Black Rose that hardly anyone uses. 1 copy of Black Rose Moonlight Dragon. I like this card because when it's special summon, it bounces a card. I just wish its effect wasn't mandatory. Like, that's the only thing I don't really like about it, but it's still a pretty decent card. 1 copy of Nothung, because you'll notice I don't run Cowboy in here, because rank 4s aren't as consistent, but this is basically just a pseudo Cowboy. When your opponent gets low on life, you can synchro into this, burn them from 800 for game. So it's kind of like a pseudo Cowboy for Aromages. 1 copy of Clearwing Synchro Dragon. It's just just amazingly good card. It can keep your high level, it protects your high level monsters from monster effects and targeting effects, and it can be a really devastating card if you smash it into construct. Copy of Yugioh Guardian. This is mostly just filler. Yugioh Guardian is not a bad card. It's still pretty decent, and with it'll be at 3,300 with Aroma Guard now, which means there's some monsters it can steal that it normally wouldn't be able to. Then one copy of Thought Ruler Archfiend, because this is another reason I wanted to run Krebons, because this card will gain you life when it runs over an opponent's monster and sends it to the graveyard, which means it'll trigger all your aroma effects, which is really nice. Now for the XYZs, there's only 4 because rank 4s are what you're going to make more consistently in this particular build. One copy of Dweller because it's negating graveyard, plus it would be at 2,200 with Rosemary. One copy of Castell to get rid of solve problem cards. One copy of Exciton when we're behind. And lastly, one copy of 101 Silent Honor Arc for dealing with monsters that have leave the field effects like Absolute Zero. So anyway, guys, it comes to the end of the deck profile today. I really appreciate when all you guys watch my videos. Tune in on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Fridays for more Yu-Gi-Oh! Content. And if you like what you saw from this video, please subscribe. Or Storms signing out.